4 words: Super Dimensional Fortress Macross. So, let me take you on a wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey trip back through time to my very early days experiencing American comics. Because here in the United Kingdom, in the 1980s, we did not regularly have American-sized comics sitting on our newsstands. It was not a thing. And yet, strangely, where I lived at the time, a tiny newsagent had a shed load of American comics. And this was one of the first comics that I picked up in the early 1980s. Marvel offshoot called New Universe, which introduced this mech called Spitfire, which has nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you about, apart from this. And here you can see a very, very old advert for a role-playing game called Robotech. And as you can see, pictured here is a Valkyrie. Now, I had not seen the Robotech cartoon. Again, it was one of the things that we missed out on here in the UK. But this immediately appealed to me as a concept. And I also have another memory of seeing that game advertised somewhere else. I don't know if it was in another American comic, but I've looked through my comics. I can't see another example of that advert in any of the other really, really old ones that I have. But that stuck in my head. And then many years later, Transformers happened. But I'm not here to tell you about Transformers, because I'm here to tell you about a pre-Transformers Transformer. Still with me? Okay. So, what I'm here to talk about is this chap. This is a Valkyrie. It's a very famous Valkyrie. And I'm going to walk you through the history of this and why it means quite a lot to me personally. And part of that is what I've just shown you, because that is one of my very early childhood memories of thinking, wouldn't it be cool if giant robots were a thing? And it was in a magazine, in a comic, that dealt with someone who could pilot a robot. Brilliant. And yes, Iron Man came along way before that. That was a slightly different sort of mech suit. It was chunkier than Iron Man. But anyway, I digress. I wasn't looking for this. It was one of eBay's evil mind-reading plots to make me buy stuff that I wasn't planning to buy. But this, as a concept, takes me straight back to my childhood, because this is the toy that inspired Jetfire from the Transformers. And if you're watching this video, you may already be familiar with this piece of history, but let me try and take you through it, because it's quite complex as licensing things go. This is a Takatoku Valkyrie. And most G1 Transformers came from Takara. And Takatoku was a company that was a rival of Takara in Japan. So they were not bestest mates. And Hasbro licensed this model, but actually not from Takatoku, I don't think. Because what happened was that Takatoku went bust. But they had a number of transforming toy lines like this, and some of those were licensed, I think actually ultimately via Bandai, to Hasbro, because Bandai ultimately ended up buying the rights to the Takatoku toy lines as they went under. So some of these were produced by Takatoku before they went under, but they were then picked up by Bandai, and Hasbro took this, recolored it, white and red and turned it into Jetfire. And you can see that Jetfire's head is lurking under here. Now, this in and of itself caused an interesting quirk of the Transformers universe, because whilst the toy was properly licensed from the Takatoku designs and became Jetfire, Robotech had been released by this stage as a cartoon, and Robotech used this design, the Takatoku design, so the Valkyrie Variable Fighter 1 VF-1 designs, of which this is a VF-1S variant, commanded by Roy Fokker. Just say it carefully, that's Fokker, of the Skull Squadron, hence the skull on the cockpit detailing and the fins. This was the fighter that appeared in that cartoon. So as a result, Harmony Gold, who developed Robotech in the United States based on Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, as the cartoon was known in Japan originally, they basically said, no, you can't use something that looks like our toy, our version of it, in the United States. So Harmony Gold apparently very aggressively blocked anyone from doing anything that looked like the Robotech Valkyries in the States. So they could do the toy, but they couldn't use the toy in the cartoon or the comic versions of Transformers. They had to do something different, which is why we shifted from Jetfire, as the toy was known, to Skyfire, as it then appeared in the comics and the toy and the cartoon, and they changed the way that it looked in the comics and the cartoon away from what the toy looked like. Still some similarities, still a white jet with some red boosters and so on, but it did not look like this. Although there was a very early toy advert for Jetfire, which has him transform into the Valkyrie Battloid mode. And he does there, he doesn't look like Skyfire, he looks like Jetfire, as you would expect him to look if the toy transformed, but that was the exception to the rule. So, for me, when I first held this toy in my hands, having saved up all of my pennies, and I mean all of my pennies, in the mid-1980s, I went to Hamleys and London on a very rare family trip to London, and I bought Jetfire from Hamleys. I only sold him in the 2000s, and in fact I was very proud of myself because I sold him as his slightly yellowed body and all his individual armour parts separately, which got me much more money from eBay, and would probably still do so. But he's gone on to reappear somewhat in this form in the comics, as I understand it, and the cartoons later in life, often by virtue of him having a helmet which looks like this head, but which when taken off turns him back into Skyfire. So this one still has meaning for me because it brings back all the feels of Jetfire. The wing configuration is slightly different. With Jetfire, you can never get the wings this high up. You could never get them to the horizontal. Apparently Jetfire had a little sort of blocker here, so you couldn't go too far forwards with them. Not sure why exactly, but that was the case. So other than that, this is pretty much bob on. I think the nose was slightly different as well. This is quite a solid nose. You'll notice that the tail fin is sort of falling down, but it's inevitable. This is a 40-year-old toy, and that's something you have to move to transform it. So I'm going to take you through the transformation. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed because I have not transformed this yet since I got it. And one of the interesting elements of this particular toy is that it has two alternate modes. It has a mode called Gerwalk. It may be pronounced Gerwalk, I'm not sure, where it's sort of half and half, where it's half a fighter and half what you call a sort of chicken walker mech. And that will sort of scoot around at ground level, and it will hold its gun in its hand. Now, this gun is a bit odd because it's a two-colour gun. I'm not sure that's how it's supposed to be, but the seller did say that it was more of a sort of reproduction-y sort of gun. So I'm not quite sure where the parts have come from. I think there also ought to be a little sight here. On Jetfire's gun, there was a sight there, so I think that little bit piece is missing. So I'm not too fussed, though. For display purposes, it'll look fine. And I have to give a shout out to the eBay seller at this point as well. And they don't know I'm doing this. It's not paid or anything. But it really made me smile because this was in the box. So a special offer for mini Autobot Warriors. So these are the original G1 Transformers. And it's saying that basically you're going to get robot points for buying from this seller that look like this. And these were on the back of original G1 Transformers boxes. And you would cut them out, send them to Hasbro, and they would send you things like watches that had an Autobot face on them. And you built up your points, and your points made prizes. So this is from G1 Jim Vintage Toys. So if you have a look for him on eBay, that's where I got this one from. And it is, as he said, some of them have got slightly sort of loose joints, but it was completely upfront about that. And it's a really clean. I mean, I did not think it was going to be this clean. When I first opened it, I was puzzled because I thought, why is it so grey? But then I remembered that Valkyries are this colour. It just looked brighter on the auction with a monitor backlight and all the rest of it, as you'd expect. So I did eventually watch Robotech, and in fact, I actually got it as I think the first one I saw was actually Super Dimensional Fortress and Macross 2 Lovers Again, I think, and so that was a slightly later follow-on, probably more in keeping with the Japanese storyline. It might even be was it a fan sub originally, possibly? But I think Manga Video brought it out in the UK, and I picked up that on VHS. So it wasn't until much later that I then saw the Harmony Gold Robotech version, which just changed a few things, I think, in terms of the interpretation and so on, but it's essentially the same storyline, I believe. Now, here we go. So, fold the fins at the back down, which is quite easy on one side. That folds up there. Now, some people are going to start shouting at me for doing this in the wrong order, and this may well be the wrong order. I have no qualms about that. And I think actually I might leave that half up. You flick that up so he's got a bit more room to manoeuvre. And then you move this down like that. And you need to keep the head pointing very straight for the next bit, as I recall. Now, if you wanted to put it into gear walk mode, all you have to do is just bring his legs down from there and open up his feet. And that is basically... Gear walk mode is basically just kind of that, only with that fully up. So I'll keep going. So now you have to sort of unhinge him, so to speak, because that's it. That was really easy, actually. So you bring his legs fully down like this. And you see, he was absolutely huge compared to a lot of other Transformers of the time. For a single Transformer, he was big. I'm loving the decals that are applied to this as well. They look in really, really good condition. I couldn't swear that they're completely complete, but so you can see the sheer sort of height of him here, because this isn't his full height, because he's going to fold over. So I lift that out of the way. This is probably not the best time to do it, actually. So this bit is a bit scary because you've got to kind of push his arms a bit out like that. And then they fold out to the sides like that. Then you can put his head in there, into the gap. And then you fold that down over the top. You just push the arms a little bit out to the sides so that can flip down. Bring his wings in, flat to the back. Bring his backpack up. Okay. Yeah, this bit was stiff, actually. My son tried to do this the other day. Turn his head around that way, so it's facing the right way. Then I do this, which feels scary with him. That's really stiff for some reason, that particular joint. Bring his backpack up. This one's already doing it, but basically fists slide out like that. Now, what I love about him, is, what I always loved about Jetfire as well, is that the articulation on him is incredible for the sort of time that we're talking about. Come on, please behave. Sorry, this is one of the snags of him is that you've got to get his arms locked in position just so, because otherwise he won't lock in. That's it. There we go. Okay, sorted. Because his arms had this tremendous range of movement, so they can go all the way out there. They can spin around and go back in again. Very, very cleverly done. Really good range of movement on him. So it was really, really impressive what you could actually do in terms of poses. And okay, yes, his knees don't go round, but you can do sort of nice kind of, sort of stances like that. But it's also incredibly stable, so he's quite happily going to stand up like that forever if you want him to display really well. There's not a problem at all. And then one fist is open, so just pull his fist all the way out, and that is a deeply, deeply loose gun. I wonder if it's a reproduction altogether in some way. I don't know. So, yeah, the gun is definitely the weak point, but it was said to be so in the auction, in fairness. So you could probably, I'm sure you could probably buy a spare Jetfire gun and use it on him, or there may well be people who have spares. But nevertheless, that is a really nice example of a 40-year-old Valkyrie toy. I mean, you can't say fairer than that. He's not super stiff in some places. He's trying to sort of fight me a little bit. But the jet form is absolutely spot on. He's just a little bit loose in places, so you'd have to look after him. But for what I paid for this, trying to get a sort of a fully mint, not yellowed Jetfire, well, good luck, basically. I mean, I said to myself, I'm not going to buy this straight away because it wasn't that cheap. But I said, if it's still around the next day, having done some comps, I'm going to commit. I'm just going to pull the trigger and I'm not going to regret it, because he really does take me back to a time when I was massively into my Transformers, and a time when I also started to understand more about anime and how we'd come to have a lot of these types of robots and mecha sort of in our lives growing up in the 80s and the 90s, because it wasn't until then that I really appreciated just how fortunate we were to have kind of picked up on this stuff from the Japanese market. Because had we not had it imported by someone, then we'd probably never have seen it. So I'm quite happy to have him. That I had a big cheesy grin on my face when I first opened it, and to have this sort of back in my hand and just sort of feel that weight to it as well. Because it's a good toy. It's metal hinges. It's really solid, and it's not ridiculously difficult to transform, as I've just demonstrated. It's perfectly possible to put them into this Batloid/Batroid mode, and you've got a little piece of history there, because Macross is still being made to this day. There have been countless different variations of the Valkyrie, of course, to this point, but nevertheless, it is still a big part of a lot of people's childhoods, especially I think in the States, where people grew up watching Robotech, and it was one of the big sort of mecha based shows that they were first introduced to. So I like my VF-1S, definitely. So perhaps one day I'll get a Jetfire to join him, but for now that's the only one I have to show you, I'm afraid. So do like and subscribe if you've enjoyed that little trip down memory lane, and I will see you for the next one. Cheers for now.